Good morning. Today's date is February 19th, 2008. My name is Tyrone Bellanger. Today I will be conducting an oral history interview with Lewis Warren Graham for the Veterans History Project in partnership with the Dalton Council on Aging. This interview is being held at the Dalton Community Television Studio in Dalton, Massachusetts. Good morning, Lou.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name and spell your last name?
Lewis Warren Graham, Graham.
Where do you presently live?
In Lanesboro, Massachusetts.
What is your date of birth and where were you born?
November 19th, 1920, in Burdett, New York.
Did you grow up and go to school there?
Yes.
All through high school, all through your education at Burdett?
Well, I finished in Watkins Glen, New York. The Burdett schools went to grade 10, and we had to go to the next town to get the 11th and 12th grades.
They didn't have a high school in Burdett?
No, they called it a union school at that time.
Oh, okay.
It was grades 1 through 9.
Yeah.
And 1 through 8, I guess it was.
Was it a long travel to high school?
3 miles.
3 miles? They had a bus for that at the time?
Yes.
Yeah. What was life like growing up during the Depression?
Well, my father had a 120-acre farm, and he did general farming, raised a variety of crops, and was pretty much independent. He didn't have access to the staples like sugars and spices and that type of thing. But he had lots of produce, lots of vegetables, grains, animals, and what he didn't need, he would barter for the things that he did need. And we didn't have a lot, but we had all we needed. We didn't want for much.
Yeah, you were comfortable, you had your food and all?
Yes.
That was... Now this was your whole family was involved with this, is that right?
Pretty much, yes.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Had 2 brothers.
Were they in the military also?
Yes, yes.
What branches of the service were they in?
My older brother was a heavy equipment operator in civilian life, and they almost immediately put him in the engineers. And
that was in the Army?
Yes.
Yeah.
And my middle brother was a tool and die maker for Remington Rand in Elmira, and they put him in the Air Force, and he was a crew chief for Lion airplanes.
Thank you. What did your dad do for a living? Of course, you said he was a farmer. No.
Yeah.
Your mother, what did your mother do?
She was a homemaker.
Homemaker. Did she also work on the farm?
Oh yeah, she was very handy around most all the operations except the heavy work. She left that for the men to do.
The tractors and...
Yeah.
Yeah. Was your father a veteran?
No.
And you did mention that you graduated from high school. What did you do after you graduated from high school?
I got a job with the Davy Tree Expert Company in Kent, Ohio.
And what was your job description there?
A climber for the tree experts.
You did a lot of climbing?
It was 99% climbing.
And I think you mentioned that they didn't have buckets back then.
They hadn't been invented then.
Yeah. So if you had a big tree, tall tree, how did you get up there? I know you...
We had a 30-foot series of ladders that we could put together in 10-foot sections. And if you needed more, you were on your own to get up the best way you could. Scramble up there like the chimpanzees.
Now, we talked earlier, but I didn't ask you this. Did you use those belts when you guys climbed, once you got up off the ladder? Was there a belt that you guys used? I remember as a grown up.
To keep us in the tree, we used a rope.
Oh, just a regular rope?
Yeah, we had a 100-foot rope that we crotched at a convenient place in a tree somewhere. And we used a bowline on the bite as a seat for our safety, and a taut line hitch to tie us in place. And we could slide up and down the rope with the taut line hitch. And if we didn't have that rope,
that was an awful dangerous job then.
It could be if you weren't very careful.
Yeah. What year was that you after you got out of high school?
1940, 41, 42.
Were you drafted, or did you enlist in the military?
I was drafted.
What year was that, do you remember?
1942.
1942. Where were you inducted? You were drafted, so where were you inducted into the service?
Well, we went to Watkins Glen and got on a bus. They took us up to Syracuse to an induction center. And then from there went to Fort Niagara, just outside of Buffalo.
And that's where you got on a bus and went to basic training?
Yeah, from there, the basic training wound up in Alabama.
What branch of the service was that?
It was an infantry replacement training center in the Army.
In the Army. How old were you then when you went to the service?
21 or something.
And what were your dates of service? You said you went in July.
July 11th or 12th, 1942.
And when did you get out?
Discharged November, I don't know, around Thanksgiving time in 1945.
Now, I want to ask you a question that normally we ask if you enlisted. How did you choose that branch of the service? But now that you were drafted, but I want to ask you how you got into the 10th Mountain Division. We're getting ahead a little bit, but just...
While I was in basic training, there was the Post newspaper that was always published every week or 10 days, and there was always an article in there about this 10th Mountain Division, and they wanted volunteers that would sign up for the division. I stayed in Alabama for about a year and a half or close to 2 years, and the word came down there that the personnel had spent up to 2 years in Alabama would be transferred out, and this would be a good opportunity for anybody who would be interested in joining this new division which was being formed. You could volunteer for this, and it would take care of the moving of the people who were due to be transferred out.
Yeah, so you basically volunteered for the 10th.
For the 10th Mountain Division, yeah, it was a volunteer organization. When they originally started out, all these candidates had to get 3 letters of recommendation to be considered to be accepted.
Oh, really?
But apparently my stint with the replacement training center in Alabama satisfied their requirements.
Yeah. So where did you do your basic training?
Fort McClellan,
Fort
Alabama.
McClellan. Now, the basic training, how was it? Was it physically hard for you to adjust to that? I mean, doing the basic training?
Well, with the activities that were involved with the tree experts, I was in pretty rugged shape. And the training didn't do much to improve my strength. I was already satisfactorily
physically fit?
I was, as far as I was concerned, the basic training was less involved than I was more active climbing trees than I was doing the basic training.
Yeah, you mentioned that you felt you actually declined physically in boot camp, which is very few.
Yeah, somewhat, yeah. Well, the activity was different. Shinnying up these trees and maintaining your balance and just keeping from falling out of the tree was more physical than the basic training was.
Other than the physical, what else did you do during your experiences during basic training?
Well, at the end of my basic training, the first sergeant came to me and said, your interview with the reception center indicates you were a trumpet player in school and civilian activities. And the bugler which I have now is not very reliable, and I'm going to ship him out. And would you be interested in taking that job? And I was surprised that they even read the account that I was musically inclined. And he said, we'll find plenty of jobs to keep you active. And they consisted of serving a tour of guard duty every 7 or 8, 9 days. And we had training films and we had training activities that I could be involved in. There was always a lot of calisthenics, which they weren't as aggressive or required a physical ability that I had already acquired climbing trees. Showed a lot of training films. They were always being shown. A lot of military courtesy and just general activities that they just needed help to.
This was all at Fort McClellan after boot camp?
Yes.
This was all, you did this now for how long?
About a year and a half.
About a year and a half. So you were sort of a jack of all trades. You did an awful lot of training.
It turned out that way, yeah. But it was interesting, and I enjoyed doing the jobs.
Yeah. Do you remember any of your instructors at boot camp or later on while you were at Fort McClellan?
Yeah, a few of them. There was a lad from Elmira that is 25 miles or so from Burdett. Then there was another lad from Rochester, and there was another lad from Binghamton. I sort of seeked out the New York people.
Yeah, so you had made connections with the people in your area.
Yeah, I didn't feel totally strange to the organization. Then, of course, we had a lot of other people in there from New York City. We got a lot of people in that area that were just inducted the same as I was.
You mentioned a Sergeant Breeze. He was the one from Elmira?
Yes.
No. What did he do? You mentioned you were talking to me about him.
He was one of the sergeants that just did the training. He had a platoon that he supervised.
Now you mentioned also mail. Was it you that was the mailman, or was that Sergeant Breeze?
Oh no! I did the mailman job too.
You did that too?
Yeah, that was a big morale booster for all these recruits. They look forward to that incoming mail.
Mail in the military was important.
Oh yeah.
Now, how did you feel after you finished boot camp, just before you were extended, to stay at, or asked to stay at Fort McClellan? How did you feel successfully finishing boot camp?
Oh, I was pleased and was happy with the experience.
Were you happy staying at Fort McClellan? I think you had mentioned that you weren't shipped out.
Well, I didn't like the direction that they seemed to have everybody headed. It was a replacement for divisions that lost a lot of personnel, and that didn't excite me too much.
Well, it wouldn't excite anybody, I don't think. Now, you mentioned right after boot camp that you didn't get any furlough, but you mentioned that later on that during your stay at Fort McClellan you got quite a few furloughs?
Yeah, every 6 months you were due to get a furlough back to home base. I don't remember how many furloughs I had there, but I had, I don't know, 3 or 4 anyway.
Now, the first time you come home in your first furlough, how did you feel when you came home with the uniform?
Oh, I was happy. Yeah, I was very proud to come home with a uniform, see the people back home.
Was it a good reception? Did they give you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
A lot of the friends that I grew up with weren't there anymore. They were either drafted or the girls were off into college or married. A lot of the people that I used to see had gone their way.
Yeah. Now, where did you report to after Fort McClellan? And you said you volunteered for the 10th Mountain Division. Where did you go? Where was it?
Camp Hale, Colorado. It was up in the mountains just 15 or 20 miles north of Leadville, 120 miles from Denver.
Do you remember the dates, the date when you went out there?
Late February. I don't know the exact date.
So you went out there right in the middle of the winter besides.
It was cold.
Yeah.
And snow. It was just one big mountain range, all totally snowed in.
Now, when you went out there, that was the 10th Mountain Division headquarters of the training.
Yes.
Were all the regiments out there? Or just, like you said, what was the regiment you were in?
85th.
85th Regiment
Yeah.
of the 10th Mountain. Were there other regiments in that division?
86 and 87th.
Were they training in the same area?
Pretty much,
Pretty
yeah.
much, yeah.
The 87th were the oldest one. They went up into Alaska The Japs had landed up in there somewhere along the Aleutians, and they went up there to chase them out. It didn't turn out to be a very aggressive expedition. When they got there, they saw the signs where the Japs had been, but when it came time to attack or to roust them out of there, they found they had already gone.
They had already left.
And they came back to Camp Hale and did the rest of their training along with the 86th and 85th.
What was your training like out there?
Rough, cold. We spent 4 nights a week out in the woods somewhere, out in the mountains. We'd go out Monday, come back Tuesday night, have Wednesday in the camp, clean up, take a shower, shave, wash your socks, go out Thursday morning, come back Friday afternoon. And if you were up to it and wanted to go on pass, you could take Saturday and Sunday off to go to Denver or Leadville or some of the towns close by.
Yeah, a little R&R. What was the temperature? You had mentioned the temperature, and I just didn't realize how bad it was.
Every day it was beautiful. The sun shone every day, and it would get up almost freezing.
Almost freezing?
But every night it was always 0 or 10 below or colder. Every star would be as bright as the street lights. We'd go down to the PX or the movie and walk back to the barracks, and we'd always remark about what a view for the stars. But the next morning there would be 6, 8, 10 inches of new snow. Sometime during the night, we always got an accumulation of additional brand new powder snow.
Wow.
It was so dry you could blow a hole in the snow 8 or 10 inches, just a puff. It was like blowing into a feather bed.
So it was pretty hard. I mean, it wasn't hard, but at that, softness, it must have been hard to walk on and walk through.
Well, it was pretty powdery. You would break through every step. And when we were out Monday or Tuesday or the Thursday and Friday, it was always you don't just easily walk. You have to pick your feet up to keep from.
The way I understood it and the way you mentioned it, the 10th Mountain Division trained mainly with skis out there. Am I right?
Every company had 3 platoons of skiers and 1 platoon of weapons, the machine guns and mortars. They had snowshoes.
And that's what surprised me. I never thought about snowshoes out there, but I never thought about the heavy weapons. So you were in the heavy weapons platoon?
Yes.
So you never got to ski?
Not every time we were in the field and we had an assigned mission, I was in the snowshoe group. You can't maneuver those heavier weapons. The machine guns weighed about 25, 30 pounds.
Yeah.
And the mortars were very similar. So you needed a little more stability. You couldn't...
the snowshoes gave you the stability?
Yeah.
Now, what was it like working with the snowshoes out there, especially carrying the heavy weapons?
Well, on the flat land, the skiers were had a problem with the new accumulation of snow that we had every night. They couldn't break a path very easy, but the snowshoes could walk along pretty good. Each squad of the snowshoers had trail shoes, but they were the long snowshoes that tapered to a point in the back, and they turned up in the front like the tips of the skis turned up. And the rest of the squad had these bear paw snowshoes. And on the flatland, the skiers had trouble breaking a path, so they put the snowshoers ahead to break the path for them. Going up the mountains, the skiers had trouble because they had the herringbone. That's where you stepped over one ski and you had to angle it out to keep you from sliding back.
Yeah.
But coming down, or you get to the top of the mountain you were climbing and go down the other side of it, the skiers had to slow down because they had to have extra space to snowshoe or snowplow down, and you need that extra room. But the snowshoers had no problem; they just walked along. When we were on the flats, the skiers were behind us, and they were always being held up because we couldn't break the trail as fast as they could walk after they got into what we broke. So they're always saying, faster, faster, faster. But coming down the other side of the mountain, the skiers had to have more room to come down because they had to snowplow or sidestep down. And we just took an extra, or a side trail, and we were always saying, faster, faster, faster. So there was always a lot of that comical conversation.
Yeah. Now I imagine you really had to be in shape to use the snowshoes. I know the skis, yeah, you had to be in shape, but the snowshoes, with my experience, not carrying anything, snowshoe was still tough.
Oh yeah.
But when you carried, you said about 30 caliber machine gun you carried?
Yeah. In Camp Hale, we had the air-cooled machine guns. But later on, when we shipped out of there, we went to Texas, we got the water-cooled machine guns, and they were heavier yet.
The water-cooled?
Oh yes, those were a real job to transport.
So you were basically out there for almost 6 months. 'Cause I think you mentioned that you left in June.
Yes.
And you went, where was it next?
Camp Swift.
Oh, that's right.
Texas.
Now, how was the training out there in comparison to the training at Camp Hale?
Pretty much like it was in Alabama. It was in the flatland. We didn't have the mountains to contend with. We had hard surface roads that we could be transported by truck or jeep, or jeep and a trailer. Although we walked a lot, because a lot of the activities that we were going to be getting into weren't on the highways, and you
still did a lot of training out in the field?
Oh yeah, we were on bivouacs all the time.
Yeah, I got to ask you a question too. Now, you were in Camp Hale in Colorado, and then you went to Camp Swift in Texas. What was the weather like? Was there a little bit of difference?
When we left Camp Hale, it was in June. I think it was June 8th or 9th, something of that nature. And there was frost on the mountains. And it was chilly. The porter that was in the Pullman that I was in was standing there in a full-length overcoat, and he was all bundled up, and he said, "Man, it's cold up here." We went over the mountain from Camp Hale by Leadville and down into probably Arizona or Texas, one of those towns. The next day it was 120, just like Alabama. Just like going from the freezer to the oven.
Yeah, so I mean, it had to take a while for your body to adjust.
In Camp Hale, you couldn't exert yourself excessively because the elevation would limit the amount of breathing you could. You just couldn't breathe enough to satisfy.
Because you were so high?
So high. And there was a division court-martial offense for anybody, for any officer that exercised his men. I think the cadence that you were limited to was something in the order of 80 or 90 steps per minute. Some of the officers would try to maintain a cadence of 120, and the men couldn't stand it.
That was at Camp Hale?
At Camp Hale.
When you got down to Camp Swift?
Well, if you exercised too much, there was just too much sweating and exertion in that
dehydration
too. So you had to be careful no matter where you were.
Yeah. Now you mentioned one other little character that affected you guys in Texas.
The chiggers.
Yeah.
Those little devils were everywhere.
How did they affect you? I mean, because they weren't like mosquitoes.
Well, the mosquitoes would bite and leave, but the chiggers would bite and stay just under the surface of your skin. And they would start to itch, and you could see them underneath the skin. And you had to get rid of them, or they would die in there and you get infected.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, if they caused an infection.
It was one of the benefits of smoking. You hold a cigarette just above the entrance point where the trigger was, and he'd back out. Then you could squash him and get rid of him.
That's how you got rid of them?
Yeah. About the only excuse for smoking.
So now you were there till December, if I'm not mistaken. You mentioned December of 1944.
Yes.
Then what did you do after that? Where did you go?
We went to Hampton Roads, Virginia, to ship overseas. We were headed for Naples, Italy, and Leghorn, Italy.
So you boarded transport ship?
Yeah, we went. The ship I was on was the United States. It's the biggest pleasure craft that the United States owned. It was a monstrous ship.
You had basically your whole regiment or more on this ship?
I'm not sure how many. It was loaded.
And I didn't ask you this before, and I'm just curious, I thought about it. Was this a large convoy? When you went over on this ship, were there other ships with you?
No, we were alone.
Just alone?
Yeah.
Wow.
The United States had something like 35 knots, I think they called it, for speed. And they said they could outrun the submarines. But they said they also changed course very frequently, so that if a sub got close to it and was getting lined up to fire at you, you would change course so quick that he couldn't stay he couldn't keep his target onto you.
Yeah. Do you remember ever getting fired at? Not that you know of?
I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah. How many days did it take you to get to Italy?
I think it was 11.
How was it? Did you see anything or do anything aboard ship? Coming up with any type of physical training or any?
As much as they could, they encouraged you to stay out of the hold. The longer you stayed in below decks, the sicker you got.
You mean as seasick or just?
Just plain seasick, yeah.
Yeah.
And most everybody was able to keep from getting seasick by being up on deck.
Topside, yeah.
We used to go way up front and watch the bow of the ship rise and lower. It was 8 or 10 feet for every wave that it rocked over. It was interesting. A lot of porpoises were racing the bow of the ship.
Oh, going along with the ship, or?
Yeah, they were going right along with it and keeping just ahead of it. I don't know what the purpose of, not a porpoise, so,
Yeah.
but they were always there.
Probably playing a game, whatever they did.
Yeah, they were a very playful animal.
So now you got to Naples, Italy, and that was what, January of '45?
Yeah, about January 10th or 11th, something like that.
Did you stay on board ship, or did you disembark?
We disembarked. I don't remember the time it took us to get off, but
You mentioned small landing craft. That you got into small landing craft.
yeah, landing ship infantry they call them,
Okay.
LSIs, and they took us up the coast of Italy to Leghorn, and Leghorn is right next to Pisa, where the Leaning Tower of Pisa is, on the Arno River.
I can't remember your answer. Did I ask you if you ever got to see the Leaning Tower?
Yeah, we hiked around it.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we were there, I don't know, 8 or 10 days, and we hiked around that several times.
You got to see a little of the world while you were.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Does it lean?
Sure does.
Like it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. After you got to Leghorn, what was your duties then? What were you doing at Leghorn?
Retrieving all of our equipment that we couldn't carry down in the bunk area, getting all our stuff put together. They cosmolined all our weapons, and we had to clean up all that cosmoline. It was a heavy grease type of protection to, I don't know why they greased them up so heavy, but
Now, how long you got everything off the ship? Did you do any training before you ascended to the mountains?
yeah, some, we were active, mostly calisthenics and short hikes, and it wasn't too extensive. Of course, we were in a area where it was heavily just a city, and you couldn't do much training because you would disrupt all the civilians.
Yeah, so there wasn't much room.
No, there wasn't much we could do.
The first time we talked, I asked you about the skis and the snowshoes and everything that you trained with. Did you take those overseas with you?
As far as I know, we did, but we never saw them.
You never saw them once you landed?
No, there wasn't enough snow to use them.
I just thought that was a little bit strange. You know, all that training that you did with this equipment and never really got to use them.
About the only thing that we really did use was the ropes and the rock climbing experience, pitons, and that was the main action for taking the mountains that we got involved in.
Yeah. I'd like to get into the mountains. The mountain range itself, the Apennines, is that how you pronounce them?
Apennines.
Apennines?
Yeah.
Apennines. Now, in February, this is when the 10th Mountain Division went up into the Apennines in February.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember the sequence of events that took place for the next few days? The first mountain that you took, and
yeah, we were getting organized, and of course the territory was all strange. The mountains were all named, and they all had a number, and the officers were the ones that were getting all the information, and they were just passing it on to the rest of the troops to what to expect and what was coming up.
so in February, what was the first mountain? Was that the first one that your regiment took?
Well, I think the first mountains that the division got involved in was an area called Riva Ridge. We didn't have any involvement in it. I think the 86th Regiment was the one that got the first taste of combat. And then there was another one, that was Mount Belvedere. That was the highest mountain, as I recall. Wasn't really too high, it was something like Greylock, 3,000, 4,000 feet. And the 85th got involved with the Mount Belvedere. And then there were not a lot of other mountains along the route. This was the mountains between southern Italy, or the Leghorn and Pisa area, and Bologna and the Po Valley. The Germans were heavily entrenched in this Apennine area, and our job was to rout them out of there. There had been several other attempts to rout them out, and they all failed. One division didn't do well at all, and then there was another group, I don't know their identification, but there were 2 or 3 attempts that all the counterattacks routed the Allies back out of the Apennines.
So this was the first attempt by the 10th Mountain Division.
Yes. But it turned out to be successful, very costly, life-wise. The 10th Mountain Division had more casualties than any other, although the accounts coming up through the full length of Italy was very costly for all of the Allies.
As you mentioned, the 10th Mountain Division was probably hit the hardest.
According to the history that the division wrote, the 10th seemed to have as many or more than all the rest of them.
It was a total of 114 days of fighting, if I'm not mistaken, that you mentioned.
Yeah, from Mount Belvedere to Lake Garda, which is at the base of the Alps.
Yeah. You remember how many casualties? Round figure.
900 and something,
Yeah.
almost 1,000.
Almost 1,000 in those 114 days, and almost 4,200 casualties.
Yes.
Wounded.
Yes.
It's an awful lot. It's an awful costly.
That's a terrible price to pay.
Do you remember how many days it took you to go across the mountain range itself? I think you said from Belvedere.
I think that was something in the order of 10 days or 2 weeks.
Yeah. And that was all the way over to Della Spa?
Yeah, Della Spa was one of the last outposts on this Apennine Highlands that we were into. From there it was downhill into the Po Valley, and the race across the Po.
How was it going through the valley, the Po Valley? Was it?
We had jeeps and trailers, and they were motoring us every day. We were never sure of how far we were going to get or where we would wind up. But it turned out that it was more of a route than it was a battle, because we'd come across areas where the Germans had just barely gotten out of sight when we showed up. There would be kitchens with food all ready to serve, but the ones who were going to get served had already left.
So basically, they weren't really trying to hold you off. They were sort of just running in front of you, or
well, the
dancing in front?
the confusion got so bad that they were just retreating and trying to find a place where maybe they could develop a stronghold, but it just didn't work.
So for you personally, it was a lot safer. I mean, they weren't fighting. The combat wasn't as heavy
No.
as you were going down through the valley.
There would be a few isolated areas where some snipers would try to hold out, but things are going so bad in Europe that they just could see the end was it was coming up, and they just couldn't hold us off.
Now there was a river you had to cross. Was that the Po River?
Yes.
Now how did you get across that?
As I remember it, it was a series of pontoons or these Bailey bridges.
Bailey Bridge, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, during this period of time, you mentioned that you thought your brother was in France?
Yeah, I knew he was
In the area.
In the area somewhere.
But you never got in contact with him?
No, we never went through the Po Valley, or went through the Apennine, or through the Alps.
Yeah.
The Brenner Pass was the object, but we stopped at Lake Garda.
Now, I'm going to go back to the valley for a minute. As you were advancing through these towns and everything else, did you find anything of interest? Did you find a cache of something?
Yeah, we one regiment was always coming across chow lines that just had the food all ready to go, and another one came across the payroll in German lira, and our I think it was the regimental sergeant major, or whatever his title was, he acquired this chest full of payroll, and he invited us to take as much money as we wanted and go to town with it. We went to Venice, and he says, just bring me back half of it. So go down and have a good time. Another place we came across a warehouse full of booze.
That's what I wanted to hear about.
The night we lined up for the evening meal, at the end of the chow line, there was this big pile of vodka and champagne and cognac and vermouth. Take what you wanted. And the next morning for reveille, the company commander lined up all that were available to line up, and in his report I gave back something like all present but not accounted for.
So a few of them didn't make it out to roll call.
They were all blotto.
You say you went as far as Lake Garda. That was your last
Yes,
point, the last stop.
yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your stay there?
As I remember it, we were there about 10 days or so, 2 weeks. And as we were there, we were on the east shore. And that was our primary objective. But looking across the lake, I don't know how far across it was, but we could see the other shore. And the Germans were going up the west shore. And the division commander had access to, I don't know, several of these amphibious ducks that were the landing crafts that a lot of them used. And some of the officers wanted to take some of those ducks and go over there and start a confrontation with the Germans. But they talked them out of it. They said they're getting out of the country as best they can, and we don't need to chase them out. They're doing their own thing. So the decision was to just let them go.
And probably.
Mussolini was over on that side also, but they took him back down into Italy someplace, and as everybody knows, they strung him up upside down.
Yeah. Well, watching the Germans, I imagine watching the Germans leave, there was no sense, as long as they were leaving.
Yeah, that was the consensus.
Yeah, you didn't have to, probably saved an awful lot of lives.
Why start something?
Right.
I guess the orders were, if you want to go over there and do something, just don't get anybody killed, because we don't want any more casualties.
Yeah. So after Garda, which was in July? Oh, no, just before.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, in June. Okay, in June. This is when you returned back to Naples.
Yeah.
And from Naples, you came back, right back to New York City.
Yeah, we landed somewhere in New York City. I don't remember the name of the post that they took us to. But from there, they gave us all 30-day furlough. We were headed for Japan, but fortunately, we didn't make it.
That's when while you were heading towards Japan, or just before you were going to go there, that's when they dropped the bomb?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you remember the ship coming back?
I think it was a Marine Fox. It was a converted tanker.
Yeah.
It was much smaller than the United States that we went over on. I don't remember how many of them were on the Marine Fox, but not as big as the United States.
Was this a convoy coming back, or just a single ship like when you went over?
A single ship, as far as I know, because the submarines had been all called back, and the war was over as far as Europe went.
Yeah. See, I just didn't know if the war was over, now they were starting to return everybody in large numbers, but apparently your ship was by itself at that time.
As far as I remember, yeah. I don't.
So now when you got back to New York City, what happened?
They sent us off on a 30-day furlough. A lot of the people were from out west, so they had another 10 days or so to get home. And the people on the East Coast, of course, departed for their 30 days right there within just a day or two. But in 30 days when we came back, they sent us to Camp Carson in Colorado. We got out there, and the people on the West Coast were still on their 30 days. So they said, take another 2 weeks, because we can't get reorganized until we get the West Coast people back here.
So you got almost 50 days of leave.
Worked out that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After that was in, probably around August or September.
August, yeah. Yeah, September or so. And the 2 weeks that we were supposed to take in addition, another lad from Connecticut and I were in the same platoon together, and he says, well, we don't want to go back home again. We just spent 30 days there. So we hitchhiked to San Francisco, had a 2-week session traveling on our thumb. It was very interesting.
So you got to see a little bit of the country?
Yeah. His, or one of the lads that was in our company was from Oakland. So we looked him up and stayed a night or two with him, then hitchhiked back to Camp Carson.
And when you got back to Camp Carson, was that where you were discharged from?
We went to Fort Logan in Denver.
Fort Logan in Denver.
Yeah, but when everybody got back to Camp Carson, the division was declared surplus, and they said we're just going to disband the division. So everybody got discharged.
Wow. Did you keep in touch with any of your buddies?
A few of them I corresponded with for 6 months or a year, but I kept getting less response, and I soon didn't continue on at all.
Did you join any military organizations?
Yes, joined the American Legion and the VFW.
You mentioned, was there a 10th Mountain, you mentioned the 10th Mountain chapter?
There was a chapter of the 10th Mountain Division. There was one New England chapter, and then there was a national chapter, and they had several reunions. I never attended any of them.
Yeah. Now you mentioned you joined the VFW American Legion, but that was just for a while. You sort of got out of the organization.
Well, I didn't care too much for the interest that the VFW or the American Legions had. Their conventions weren't very exciting. They didn't do much but have a big beer bust. I wasn't interested in the drinking.
Before I get into what I want you to talk about, I've missed a couple of things here, and I would like to ask you the questions. When you were discharged, how did you feel? The day you were discharged? And
Oh, I was happy. I was proud that I had served my country, and the GI Bill was being made available, and I said, here's a golden opportunity to improve my chances of better work.
Did you find it hard to adjust back to civilian life from the military for the last couple of years?
No.
And you did say that you took advantage of the GI Bill.
Yes.
Did you go back to college, or?
I went to a technical school. It wasn't college, but it was technical training for, I studied electricity.
And so what did you do for a living once you got out of your?
General Electric from Pittsfield was at the school about a week or 10 days before we finished our course and graduated down there, and they hired me.
You were recruited right out of technical school, right at GE?
Yes.
Right here in, locally in Pittsfield?
Yes.
And how many years did you spend with GE?
35.
Did you marry and have a family?
Yes.
And children?
Had a daughter and a son.
I think you mentioned that your son is in Boston?
Yes. He's working down there in the Cambridge area. My daughter's in Delaware, working in the Newark area.
That's good. Now, we were talking about the Legion, American Legion, that you really, didn't stay with. But you mentioned, and I think that I want you to mention it, or I can mention it here, how many years of volunteer service that you've done with different organizations.
Oh.
I think it's very impressive what you've done.
Well, with GE, which is my primary source of revenue, 35 years. I worked with the Red Cross for 55 years, volunteer work, did a lot of driving for the vets, took a lot of soldiers to Northampton, Albany, Springfield, and worked for the RSVP here in Pittsfield, worked for Tanglewood on their first aid staff down there for 55 years.
I think that's remarkable. I mean, you spent over 55 years, 30 years with the RSVP, but 55 years volunteering at Tanglewood and 55 years at the Red Cross.
I got more satisfaction out of that volunteer work than I would from the VFW or the American Legion.
Yeah.
They're both good organizations, and they serve a very important role. But the other volunteer work that I could get involved in interested me more.
Sure. Do you feel that your service experience had a positive or negative, effect on your life?
Oh, positive. I was able to do many interesting things that I would never have done if I had stayed on the farm.
I understand that we've got one picture that you would like to show and explain. Okay?
Yeah. That's a monument out in Camp Hale. It's a big granite slab with all the deceased soldiers, the 10th Mountain Division. There's more than 900 names there. It was so big that the camera had to be far enough away so that you couldn't read the inscriptions of all the names, but that's
It looks like an impressive monument. I just,
that's
you know,
all the deceased that the 10th Mountain suffered while they were there.
wow. That little.
I've never gone back there. I haven't seen it. A friend of mine went out through there and took the picture and brought it back to me.
Well, I would like to thank you very much for sharing your experiences and giving the service of our country. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm glad to do it.